The other night, Chief Kitchens, the police chief here in Leavenworth, had a forum. It was about the use of force, and it was also about community policing, but it was billed as about use of force. And it's not hard to understand why it is that we had a forum on this with everything you're seeing in the news. Some of the Democrat candidates here in Leavenworth and in Lansing have tried to make this an issue in the election, and so he was kind of on the defensive. You know, he was sort of defending why the police should have to use force, which to me, obviously their duty is to protect and serve the public, but sometimes that means they have to wield force to protect good people from bad people. And to me, that's pretty obvious, but he had to defend himself and defend the use of force of police. And I don't have any, I do believe that a public official, whether elected or appointed, has a responsibility to explain their actions and decisions to the public. So I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with him coming and having that discussion. But I was a little bit, frankly, offended by the tone of some of the people in the room, the presumption that police are just waiting to beat on people and can't wait to pull out the billy club. And so I wanted to talk about it for a minute. Somebody asked a question in the middle of the forum, and I think that it really goes to the point that I want to make today. Somebody asked, well, hey, in the military, if you don't use force correctly, you can go to jail for it. And of course, Chief Kitchens, because I was like the most recent retiree in the room, he just looked at me, and so I stood up and I said something. And after I thought about it, I wished I'd said about 3 other things, but this is what I said. What I said was, well, yes, the military, when we go to Iraq or we go to Afghanistan, and there are strict rules in that situation where you're in a counterinsurgency and you're trying to help the government win the hearts and minds of the people that they're trying to govern. There are strict rules on the use of force, because you use force against the wrong person, you can make it harder for the government to achieve its aims. And there are laws of land warfare. If you use disproportional force, or if you injure a non-combatant intentionally, you can go to jail for that. There have been some very high-profile cases. Some of the folks that we call the Leavenworth 10 were charged with violations of the law of land warfare. Lieutenant Calley back in the Vietnam War is an example that kind of comes to everybody's mind when they talk about this topic. But what I wanted to, now after I went home thinking about that question, and I wanted to talk about it here because the more I thought about it, the more strongly I felt about it. A military is, the purpose of the U.S. Army is to fight and win the nation's wars, right? And the way, whether it's a low intensity conflict or a high intensity conflict, it involves the intentional use of violence to compel the other side, the enemy, to do what it is that the United States of America needs them to do for our strategic objectives, right? And as a soldier on the ground, what that means is one day I get the call that I've got to go to Iraq, and I get on a plane and I go to Iraq. And for a year, my life is in danger. I am under threat of attack from the enemy, and I have an inherent right to self-defense, but I also am expected, or as a leader, expected to direct my soldiers in the application of force to achieve military ends. Now that force has to be wielded against a combatant, but somebody who's threatening us or who's threatening others or threatening the people. But our job is to use violence to achieve America's aims, right? Rush Limbaugh used to say the Army's job is to kill people and break things. That's maybe a little bit shorthand, maybe a little bit more complicated than that, but that's frankly what the Army's job is. But then when I'm done doing my year in Iraq, I get back on a plane and I come back to the United States, and I am in relative safety I'm not being shot at. I'm not being murdered. I'm not being, I'm not being roadside bombed when I go to work every day. I have a reasonable expectation that I'm going to be safe throughout the day and I'm not threatened. And if I were to wield force in that instance, it's a criminal act, unless I'm defending myself in my home or my family in my home, right? A police officer, on the other hand, their duty is to protect and serve us. So when I come back from Iraq, the reason that I live in safety and I don't have to wield force to defend myself or to, is because the police force is there to protect and serve me. That's their purpose. That's their reason to be. And if you are that individual patrolman in the sheriff's office or in the Leavenworth PD or as a state trooper, your job is ultimately, wherever possible, not to use force. Force is a last resort, either to protect yourself or other civilians, or to make a lawful arrest because of probable cause, if they're resisting arrest. But as Chief Kitchen said, 99 times out of 100, probably 99.5 times out of 100, he says, the officer says you're under arrest, and the person turns around and they put the cuffs on, and there's no force at all is wielded. But what that means to that individual officer is that he wakes up a cop, he goes out to the mailbox a cop, he gets in his car to go to work a cop, because everybody in town knows he's a cop. He does his job as a cop every day, and then he comes home at night, and he's a cop all night at home with his family. And he is under, it's not a high level threat, but he is under a constant level of threat because he has chosen to put on a uniform and protect and serve this community. And so the reason that, frankly, it's so offensive to me that a group of people would go into a discussion with people that risk everything every day to protect and serve us, and with an accusatory tone grill them, give them the third degree about why and when they're using force and whether they should be using force at all. That's why it offends me, because those folks are at risk 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, so that me, my wife, my granddaughter, my son, you can be safe and not have to constantly be worried about the threat of violence against you, your property, or your family. So rather than going to them with an accusatory tone and grilling them about why they should ever use force, we should be thanking them for their service. And that's what I did at the end of it. I went around, I shook the hand to every single police officer, and I thanked them for their service, because I am very, very grateful for their service. And this idea that you're seeing around the country of defunding the police, they're doing it in Lawrence right now. The city commission's figuring out how they can defund the police while there are protesters blocking off Mass Street and occupying South Park down there. That's not just offensive to me, it's stupid. Because you look at how we as a state were able to respond to the craziness going on in the world with this Black Lives Matter and all these protests and the ripping down of monuments. And then you look at what's going on right across the river over in Kansas City, and then in St. Louis, or up in Chicago, or in a lot of other big cities in the Midwest. We are so privileged and lucky to have such a great police force, such great dedicated men and women who are willing to protect and serve us every day.